Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to see on the evening news. Nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, it was the kind of American town where people left their doors unlocked, neighbors waved at each other, and gossip rarely went beyond who won the Friday night football game. But that all changed one chilly October evening. Elena Rivers, a young woman just 25 years old, vanished without a trace. Elena wasn't just another face in town. She was well known for her kindness, her smile, and most of all, for the fact that she was 7 months pregnant. When she failed to return home from the grocery store, her fiancé grew concerned. At first, neighbors suggested she might have gone into labor early. But hours passed, then days, and no hospital had any record of her. What began as mild concern soon spiraled into panic. The search parties combed the woods, volunteers put up missing posters, and whispers spread like wildfire. Where was Elena Rivers? And more importantly, who wanted her gone? Elena's disappearance didn't add up. Witnesses confirmed they saw her leaving the grocery store, a small bag of baby clothes in hand. Security cameras showed her smiling as she walked toward her car. Then nothing. Her fiancé sat down with police, his hands shaking as he described the last time he spoke to her. She said she'd be home in 10 minutes. That was the last message he ever received. As detectives retraced her steps, they realized there were no signs of struggle, no car abandoned on the roadside, no trace of Elena at all. It was as if she had been swallowed by the night. The community clung to hope that maybe she'd turn up safe, but as the weeks dragged on, that hope faded. When the leaves began to fall, so too did the illusion of safety in Willow Creek. Everyone wanted answers. The police were determined to find them, but they weren't prepared for what they would discover. 2 weeks after Elena vanished, a hunter wandered deep into the woods near the edge of town. His dog barked furiously at a patch of earth that looked freshly disturbed. At first, he thought it was the work of wild animals, but when he saw scraps of fabric poking through the dirt, dread set in. Police arrived swiftly. The ground was dug up, and within hours, their worst fears were confirmed. It was Elena Rivers, and with her, the tiny form of the child she had never been given the chance to bring into the world. The entire town went silent. Willow Creek had lost more than a young woman. It had lost a future, a child, and a sense of innocence. The police now had a murder on their hands. And in a place where everyone knew everyone, suspicion spread fast. But suspicion alone wouldn't catch a killer. Among the faces at the candlelight vigil for Elena was Daniel Cross. To outsiders, Daniel was the last person anyone would suspect. He was well respected, a church volunteer, a man with a steady job, and a reputation for being polite, dependable, even charming. But detectives noticed something others didn't. Daniel's house was only 2 streets away from Elena's, and in the days after her disappearance, he seemed unusually calm, almost too calm. When questioned, Daniel claimed he hadn't seen her that evening. He said he spent the night at home, reading. His alibi was neat, rehearsed, and seemingly airtight. But detectives couldn't shake the feeling that beneath his polished exterior was something far darker. They began to dig, not just into Elena's grave, but into Daniel's past. What they found was chilling. Daniel had no criminal record, no history of violence, but he had an obsession: true crime. His bookshelves were lined with titles about serial killers, crime scene investigations, and unsolved cases. He subscribed to forums where people dissected infamous murders and speculated how killers avoided capture. The detectives realized they were dealing with someone who didn't just commit a crime. He had studied how to get away with it. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no obvious trail. The burial site was chosen carefully, the soil packed down to avoid detection. Even his alibi seemed to mirror tricks used by criminals in cases he had studied. This was no crime of passion. This was methodical, calculated, planned. But even the most careful criminals make mistakes. For weeks, detectives hit dead ends. But then, a breakthrough. A neighbor's old security camera caught something blurry in the middle of the night. The figure of a man dragging what appeared to be a heavy object toward the woods. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the gait, the build, it resembled Daniel. and in his hand was something long and unmistakable, a shovel. When police confronted him with the evidence, Daniel didn't flinch. He brushed it off, claiming he often took late-night walks to clear his head. But the cracks in his story were beginning to show, and once the cracks appear, the whole facade eventually falls apart. The courtroom buzzed with tension when Daniel Cross finally stood trial. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had carefully lured Elena to her death, hiding his crime under the cloak of normalcy. The defense fought hard. They argued the evidence was circumstantial, the video blurry, the motive unclear, but the jury couldn't ignore the details. The timeline, the inconsistencies, the chilling obsession with crime cases. Witnesses testified, experts explained soil samples matching Daniel's property, and Elena's fiancé sat broken, listening to every word. The town watched closely, waiting to see if justice would be served, or if a murderer would walk free. After days of deliberation, the jury returned. The word echoed through the courtroom, guilty. Daniel Cross was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge's gavel came down hard, but not as hard as the silence that followed. Elena's family wept quietly, knowing no punishment could bring her back. The town exhaled. Willow Creek could sleep again, knowing a predator had been caged. But justice in the courtroom is only one kind of justice. In Daniel's case, something far more terrifying was waiting. Daniel adjusted to prison life quickly, at least during the day. But at night, something changed. It began with whispers, faint at first, almost like the wind. But the whispers grew clearer. They called his name. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing outside his cell when no guards were there. He told himself it was his imagination. But when he heard the faint cry of a baby echoing through the darkness, he knew it was something else. He tried to stay awake, but exhaustion always won. And when sleep came, so did Elena. In his dreams, her eyes glowed pale, her swollen belly heavy with the child he had taken. She stood at the foot of his bed, silent, accusing. No prison walls could protect him now. Weeks turned to months. Daniel Cross was no longer the composed man who once outsmarted detectives. He was a wreck. He refused to eat, screamed at night, and begged guards to move him to another block. But wherever he went, she followed. The whispers, the cries, the presence in the shadows. The guards called him delusional. The other inmates mocked him. But Daniel knew the truth. The woman he murdered and the child who never drew breath were with him. Always. He had beaten the system for a time, but he could never escape the eternal judgment that followed. Daniel's first weeks in prison were uneventful. He followed the rules, kept to himself, and avoided fights. But at night, the cell became his battlefield. He woke drenched in sweat, claiming he heard Elena's cries echoing down the halls. Guards dismissed it as guilt gnawing at his conscience. But the nightmares grew worse. He saw her pale face at the end of his bed, her hands clutching her swollen belly. Every time he closed his eyes, she was there. Soon, it wasn't only at night. During the day, Daniel began hearing whispers. In the cafeteria, in the yard, even during chapel. Voices calling his name, the faint cry of a newborn echoing in the background. His cellmates thought he was losing his mind, mocking him as the haunted man, but Daniel knew what he heard. Elena wasn't letting him rest. She had followed him behind bars. One night, Daniel's new cellmate woke screaming. He swore he saw a woman in white standing in the corner of their cell, staring directly at Daniel. The prison dismissed it as paranoia, but word spread quickly among the inmates. Soon, no one wanted to share a cell with him. Guards began whispering too, reluctant to take the night shift near his block. The haunting was no longer just in Daniel's head. It was becoming real to everyone around him. Daniel stopped eating. He scratched strange symbols into his cell wall, muttering prayers under his breath. The once calm, calculating man who had fooled an entire town now trembled at shadows. Inmates watched him with a mix of fear and fascination. Was it guilt? Insanity? Or something darker at work? Doctors prescribed medication, but it did nothing. At night, the cries grew louder. The walls seemed to close in. Daniel was unraveling. One stormy night, guards rushed to Daniel's cell after hearing blood-curdling screams. He was on the floor, begging for mercy from something unseen. He swore Elena stood over him, her eyes hollow, her belly glowing faintly. "I hear the baby," he screamed, clawing at his own skin. The guards pulled him back, but Daniel's eyes told the story. He wasn't fighting them. He was fighting the woman he had buried months ago. By the time Daniel reached his 5th year in prison, he was a shell of the man he once was. Frail, paranoid, whispering to ghosts only he could see. Inmates said they often heard a woman crying near his cell, even when it was empty. Guards admitted seeing shadows where none should be. One morning, Daniel was found lifeless in his bed, his expression frozen in terror. His hands clawed at his chest as if trying to tear something out. The coroner ruled it heart failure, but those who knew the story whispered another explanation. Elena Rivers had finally claimed her justice. Hit the subscribe button for more stories of crime, injustice, and the pursuit of truth.